Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and another true crime episode with Normandi. Today we are going to talk about Mary Flora Bell, the 11-year-old serial killer, also known as the Tyneside Strangler. This case really fascinated me as it brings us back to the age-old question of nature versus nurture. Today, Mary Bell is out and about, walking around in the free society. I'm not going to lie, it does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable because you never know how many other cases there are just like this. You never know who's standing next to you in the grocery store or who's driving in the car right next to you. Do let me know what you think. Are people born evil? Or is it just their circumstances that makes them who they are at the end of the day? Before we go on to the story though, I'd just like to remind everybody that everything you hear on my channel comes straight from the internet. I spend hours and hours researching these things. So if I do have some inaccurate information or you know of a source where I can get more accurate information, please let me know. This isn't my own opinions at all or own facts. It all comes straight from the internet. Mary Flora Bell was born on the 26th of May 1957 in Northumberland in the UK to Mother Elizabeth and Father William. Mary seems to have grown up in Scotswood in Newcastle. This area was really ridden with crime. It seems to be a bad area where criminal activities and prostitution was a norm back then. I don't know if it's still the same today, but back then it was a really, really bad neighborhood. Now let's talk a little bit more about Mary's mother, Elizabeth McCricket, also known as Betty. She was a well-known prostitute in the area. Elizabeth had Mary when she was only 17 years old, and according to Mary's aunt Isa, Elizabeth resented hospital staff for trying to put her newborn baby into her arms. She told them to just take that thing away from her. Right through her young life, Mary suffered numerous household injuries through accidents. Eventually this led everybody, family and friends, to believe that Betty was actually trying to hurt or even kill her daughter. She was really neglecting Mary. On one occasion, when Mary was about 3 years old, Betty actually dropped her from the first-story window. She often gave her sleeping tablets to eat as sweets, and she even sold her to a mentally ill woman once who couldn't have children of her own. It really looked like Betty wanted to get rid of this child and that she resented her. But even after numerous offers from friends and families to take care of Mary, Betty refused, forcing her daughter to come home to her every night. And Mary later testified that by the age of 4, her mother Betty would force her to perform sexual acts on her clients for extra income. Mary's father William, also better known as Billy, wasn't much of a role model either. He was a violent alcoholic and had a really lengthy criminal record. Police knew him very well. I also couldn't confirm 100% that William was actually Mary's father, but Betty did marry him soon after Mary's birth, so he was the only father that Mary ever knew. So Mary grew up as an unloved and unwanted child. Her mother would often go away on business trips with her clients, leaving Mary alone with her father, and that was if he was even around. If he wasn't around, Mary had to spend most of her time alone in their home. But it was common for kids to be left unsupervised back then. Children would often be left alone, playing outside late into the midnight hours, from as young as 2 years old. Mary had a really bad temper from a really young age as well, and I can't help but think if it had something to do with being thrown out of a first-story window when she was only a little girl. She had violent mood swings all the time and was very, very unpredictable. She also wet her bed quite often, and that is usually a sign of an underlying problem at that age. And I do think that this girl really had more than her fair share of problems. She got into fights at school, attacking her classmates, strangling them, and even putting out cigarettes on their bodies. Her classmates reported that they were scared of Mary. They were even afraid to turn their backs on her because if they took their eyes off her, they never knew if she would pounce on them next.
Mary's teachers at Delaval Road also became aware that she seemed to have a sadistic streak.
I met Mary when a child in my class came in one morning and had a mark on her cheek. When I asked her what it was, she said that Mary had stepped out a cigarette on her cheek. And when I sent for Mary, along came this little girl, and I said to her, "Have you done this?" And Mary said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "Well, I'm just sorry for what you've done." She said, "Yes."
In interviews with Mary's old classmates at Delaval Road Junior School, they said they actually became accustomed to Mary's sudden bursts of outrage. They could see her focusing in on the next person that she was about to attack, and her head would start to shake before she actually went for them and started strangling them.
In the same class as Mary, and that's when I used to play with her. The first thing that comes into your mind about Mary is her eyes. She's got very, very distinctive blue eyes, very attractive blue eyes, I suppose, but they are very distinctive and they can fix you with a stare.
She had such a heavy dark fringe in the blue eyes, the piercing eyes. She would stay, and it's just like got fixed on you, you know it. You knew you were in for trouble.
She could be sort of fine, playing away 1 minute, doing the things normal kids do, and then she'd maybe get something that kid might upset her, and that's when the change would start, and she could become quite aggressive.
From 9-year-old, where I can remember, I was frightened of her, so what you did was you kept away from her. But the situations where she would come to you, or who you were playing with, so you just had to watch. You had to be very, very careful of her. You wouldn't have turned your back on her. Her eyes would go, she would act funny, her head would shake, and then she would know how to get by the throat. And the one time that I'll never ever forget, the little girl I used to play with, she had her hands so tight around her throat, her eyes, her face was red. Her lips were going a different colour, she was choking, but my sister that was in the middle-aged sister, she got her off.
Mary eventually became friends with a girl next door, Norma Bell. They weren't related in any way. Norma Bell was about 2 years older than Mary, but she was said to have been really slow. So mentally she might have been the same age, even younger as Mary, and this suited Mary very well. So initially, in the time leading up to the first murder, Mary and Norma always seemed to be involved whenever a child got hurt. On the 11th May of 1968, police or somebody found a 3-year-old boy walking around dazed and bleeding. The boy later said that he was playing with Mary and Norma on top of an old empty building, and one of the girls pushed him off the roof, but he couldn't say which one it was. He was too young to remember or to know which one it was. Later that same day, though, police got a call from the parents of 3 little girls complaining that Mary and Norma tried to strangle their girls while playing in a sandpit outside.
Norma pinned us down, and Mary had grabbed us by the neck and started strangling us. And then she had her hand here and she was getting the sand and then pouring it in my mouth, and it couldn't go in quick enough, and she tried to stuff her fingers down, basically, to go it further down. And obviously I was terrified. And I think Norma was a little bit frightened when she seen what Mary was doing, because Norma jumped up. And by that time, she had jumped up, and I managed to struggle and get free and run home.
Later that evening, both girls were interviewed by the police, and both girls denied having anything to do with the little boy they found earlier that day. When asked about the little girls, Mary said that she knew nothing about that. Norma, however, said that Mary did try to strangle each of those little girls. She walked up to the little girl and asked her what would happen if you choked somebody. Would they die? And then she put her arms or her hands around this girl's throat and then started squeezing. Luckily, nobody was harmed that day, but police just gave Mary and Norma a warning due to their age, and they took no further action against them. Now let's just backtrack a little bit. In the 1960s, Newcastle upon Tyne experienced a huge renewal project, and there were plenty of empty houses, empty old houses that was basically falling apart. They were removing these houses to make space for new houses and high-rise flats, and this often became a playground for the little kids that was left unattended the whole day. They also played in a nearby wasteland that was close to the railway, and everybody knew this as Tin Lizzie. On the 25th of May, One day before Mary's 11th birthday, the body of a sweet, inquisitive, innocent little 4-year-old boy, Martin Brown, was found in the upstairs bedroom of one of these empty houses right across from the railroad and Tin Lizzie. Martin's body was found by 3 boys who also went there to go and play later on. He was found lying on his back with his arms above his head, with a few specks of blood around his mouth and foam coming from his mouth. A workman later then arrived and also tried to perform CPR, but it was too late at that point. In the meantime, Mary and Norma went to go and knock on the door of Martin's Aunt Rita and told her that they think Martin got hurt, but they couldn't be sure as there was too much blood to tell. The very next day, though, Martin did go in for a post-mortem, and they couldn't tell what the cause of death was. Initially, investigators thought that Martin might have died of poisoning because they did find a couple of empty pill holders or tablet boxes that was lying around this empty house, possibly left there by the previous owner that evacuated quickly. But later on, the doctor rejected this theory and he confirmed that Martin definitely did not die of poisoning. The next day, on Mary's 11th birthday, they broke into a local nursery. They got in through the roof, peeling away some of the slate tiles. They got in there, they threw around some desks, they smeared ink and poster paints all over the place. And they left 4 notes for police to find later when they investigated. Now, at this point, police obviously didn't know that it was the girls yet, but they did confess to being the culprits later on. The next day, a staff member reported the vandalism to police. They did come out to the scene and they actually found the 4 notes that were spread around the nursery, confirming or confessing to the death of Martin Brown. Now, the 4 notes that they found were all written in a childish handwriting. You could see the letters and the spaces and the spelling was off. The first letter or the first note read that I murder so that I may come back. The second note read, yes, we did kill Martin Brown, so fuck off you bastards. Other notes were very unclear and full of mistakes, and police couldn't really figure out what they were trying to say. It seems like the notes were full of sexual slurs and just bad words, and police said this was just a childish prank and they didn't pay much attention to it at that time. 2 days later, on the 29th of May, in a game of chicken, both girls went to Martin Brown's house and they asked to speak to his mother, June. Mary then asked June if she could see Martin, and June obviously replied that no, she couldn't see Martin as he was dead. And Mary replied to this, yes, I know he's dead, but I really want to see him in his coffin.
Just before Martin was buried, they came to my house and asked if they could see him. And I knew that they knew he was dead. So I just looked like blank at them, you know. And I said to the youngest of the 2, Mary, she was littler than the other one, I said, well, you can't see Martin, Martin's dead. She says, I know he's dead. She says, I want to see him in his coffin. With that, I slammed the door in her face, and I just collapsed behind the door, and my husband had to come get us and he had to send for the doctor.
After this, 2 months passed without incident, and the neighborhood just went back to being its normal self. Nobody was suspected of the death of Martin Brown, and he was believed to have died of natural causes. On the 31st of July, 3-year-old Brian Howe's parents was out and about looking for him, saying that he was last playing outside of their house with one of his siblings and a family dog, and with Mary and Norma Bell. Later on, the community got concerned and everybody was out looking for him without any success. Later on that evening, at about 11:10, the search party did find Brian Howe's body between 2 concrete blocks on the Tin Lizzie. The first policeman at the scene said that it looked like somebody was trying to cover the body, and it was full of clumps of grass and weeds. The little boy's body already started to change color, and police said that there was bruises and scratch marks on his body, and a pair of scissors was found at his feet. The coroner did conclude that Brian was strangled, and that the boy was dead for at least 7.5 hours before he was found. The coroner said that somebody must have closed his nostrils and then strangled him with another hand. Numerous wounds was inflicted on the child's legs before he had died. Parts of his hair was cut off, his genitals was partially mutilated, and there was a crude attempt at making an M with a razor blade or a scissor on the boy's abdomen. It looked like a small amount of force was used to strangle this boy, and this led the coroner and police to believe that the murderer might be another child, just a little bit older than Brian. Police found grey and maroon fibers all over Brian's body, and they couldn't find anything that matched this at Brian's house. So this led them to believe that these fibers did come off the murderer. The discovery of Brian Howe's body launched a huge investigation. Over 100 detectives of Northumberland was on the case, and by the 2nd of August, over 1,200 children have been questioned. Norma and Mary were questioned on the 1st of August, as a lot of witnesses already informed police that they saw the two girls playing with Brian shortly before his death. Norma was very on the edge of her seat when she was questioned, but Mary had a calm demeanor about her. Both girls gave contradicting statements, and both of them said that yes, they had been playing with Brian, but they never saw him again after lunchtime on that day. Questioned further, Mary now told police that she remembers seeing an 8-year-old boy playing with Brian on the 31st of July, and that she also saw the boy hitting Brian. Mary then went ahead to say that she also saw the boy with a pair of scissors that day, and that he was trying to cut a cat's tail, but he couldn't manage to do so because the scissors was broken. It was a self-incriminating statement, and convinced Detective James Dobson that Mary was indeed the killer, as nobody else knew about the scissors that they found at the crime scene. In addition to this, police also questioned the 8-year-old boy that Mary said she saw with Brian that day, and he was at the Newcastle International Airport that specific day. On the 4th of August, police received a call from Norma's parents saying that their daughter would like to confess to what she knew about the murder. Detective Dobson later arrived at their home. He cautioned Norma and then went ahead and asked her what she knew about this case. Norma said that she had nothing to do with the murder, but that Mary took her to the site and then showed her the body of Brian, and she told her what she did to the little boy. She showed Norma how she strangled him and how she inflicted all the numerous scars on his body before actually hiding the blade underneath a rock close by on the Tin Lizzie. Norma then took police to the crime scene and showed them where Mary has hidden the blade. Norma also made a drawing of the scars on the boy's abdomen without police telling her, and at the end of the day it matched precisely to the coroner's report. Mary Bell's house was visited on the 5th of August in the early hours of the morning. This time Mary Bell was much more defensive when a detective confronted her with her discrepancies in her previous statement. She said that the police was trying to brainwash her, and later that same day Norma was questioned again. This time she confessed to police that she was lying the previous night and she was actually present when Mary strangled Brian. Norma said that the three of them were alone playing on the Tin Lizzie when all of a sudden Mary went all funny and started strangling Brian, pulling him down onto the grass. She eventually got tired and said that her hands felt funny and that Norma had to take over. Norma got scared and she ran away, leaving Mary alone with Brian. Forensic examination on clothes owned by both Norma and Mary showed that they were an exact match to the fibers that was found at Brian's body. The grey fibers came from a coat of Mary, and then the maroon fibers was from a dress that Norma owned. Furthermore, the exact same grey fibers were found on little Martin Brown's body. Brian Howe was laid to rest at a local cemetery on the 7th of August. Dobson said that he planned to arrest Mary and Norma later on that day, but at that specific time, as the coffin was coming out of his house, Mary was actually standing at the front door laughing and rubbing her hands as she saw the coffin come past her. That night at 8 p.m., both girls was arrested for the murder of Brian Howe, Mary just bluntly replied that, well, that's fine by me. And Nora said that she never did anything, and she told Mary that she'd get back at her for doing this. In the presence of an independent witness, Mary now prepared a written statement where she confessed to being at the scene, but she said that Norma actually committed the crime. She also admitted to writing the notes along with Norma, the notes that was found at a local nursery when Martin Brown died. Both girls underwent psychological evaluations. Norma was found to be mentally slow and to follow her. She didn't really have a strong personality and could easily be persuaded to do anything. Mary, on the other hand, was found to be very smart and conniving. So she was definitely the leader in the pack. At first, Mary was willing to talk, but then later she became very defensive and she got really angry when police questioned her. 4 psychiatrists evaluated Mary, and although she did not suffer from a mental disorder, she did have a psychopathic personality disorder. The trial for both Mary and Norma started on the 5th of December 1968 for the murder of Martin Brown and Brian Howie. Both girls pleaded not guilty. Against protest from both of the girls' defense counsels, the judge waived the right of the girls' anonymity, and the media did have a right to post their photos, age, and all the information that they could on the girls. This was a very hard case, as the court never saw such young offenders before, and to make them just a little bit more comfortable, they were allowed to sit next to their legal representatives, and police officers dressed in normal everyday civilian clothing sat next to them, just to make everything a bit more homey. They were also in the center of the court, and they were within arm's reach of their families, everything just to make them more comfortable in court. Norma's defense argued that although the girls were at the crime scenes together, there was no real evidence that Norma was actually part of any of the murders, and that they shouldn't punish 2 girls for the crimes of only 1. Harvey Robson then delivered closing arguments on behalf of Mary. He focused in on her family background, her history of abuse, and then also on her severe personality disorder. He argued that Mary could not tell the difference between right and wrong, and therefore could not be held responsible for her actions. The trial lasted 9 days long, and on the 17th of December 1968, the jury retired to go and consider the verdict. They were only away for 3 hours and 25 minutes before returning with the verdict. Mary Bell was cleared of murder, but she was convicted of manslaughter of both boys, and this on the ground of diminished responsibility. Norma Bell was acquitted of all charges. When she heard this news, Norma laughed and clapped her hands, whereas Mary burst out in tears as she saw her mother and grandmother also sobbing. Now that Mary Bell was convicted of manslaughter, nobody really had given any thought to where she was actually going to spend that first night after sentencing, as she was too young to even go to a mental criminal institution. She was sent to Red Bank Secure Unit, a young offenders institute, where she was the only female amongst 24 prisoners. She spent around 6 years in this institute and claimed to have been sexually assaulted by one of the staff members from the age of about 13. After shortly escaping from another prison that she went to in the meantime, Mary ended up at a place called HM Prison in the village of Ascombe Richards. This was an open category prison where Mary was allowed to do some work under supervision guidelines to prepare her for eventual release into society. Mary Bell was released on the 23rd of May 1980 at the age of 23. She had spent almost 12 years in prison. She was granted anonymity and allowed to go and start her life elsewhere in the country under a new assumed identity. Mary Bell gave birth to a daughter 4 years after her release. Her daughter knew nothing about Mary's history until 1998, when reporters discovered Mary's identity. Currently, she was living on the Sussex coast. This forced Mary Bell and her then 14-year-old daughter to leave their home and be driven to a safe house by undercover police officers. Now, the anonymity granted to Mary's daughter was at that point only to be extended until the age of about 18. However, on the 21st of May 2003, Mary Bell won another High Court order granting anonymity to herself, her daughter, and then later to be granted to her granddaughter as well for the rest of their life. Mary Bell's whereabouts are still unknown, and it's still protected by the court order granted in 2003. However, Mary did say that the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother could never excuse her of the crimes that she committed. But with that said, Mary Bell also never fully confessed to any of these murders. That was it for the Mary Bell case. If you'd like to hear more true crime stories with me, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate that. See you next time. Bye.